For over 50 years, Burlington's legacy has been great deals on coats for all weather conditions. So before you're caught unprepared for the winter weather, head to Burlington for name brands, quality items, and surprising fits for every family member. Stock up on coats, sweaters, and accessories before the cold hits, so you can finally stop avoiding the elements and start living comfortably. Warm up at your nearest Burlington location less than 1 mile away. Burlington. Deals, brands, wow.
When you check out at the pharmacy, you see the journey from idea to medicine, thanks to our intellectual property system, or IP for short. IP safeguards inventions, like a new way to prevent seizures or lower cholesterol. And IP supports competition from other brands, then lower cost generics, which are 90% of prescriptions filled in the US. Innovation, competition, lower costs, thanks to IP. Learn more at phrma.org/IP works wonders.
Hello, Beat Check listeners. I'm Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, Portland City Hall reporter for the Oregonian OregonLive, and your host today. Last week, plans for the largest U.S. supermarket merger in history imploded in spectacular fashion. First, an Oregon federal judge blocked the $24.6 billion, that's with the B, bid by Kroger to take over Albertsons, its next largest rival. Less than 24 hours later, Albertsons, which also owns Safeway, pulled out of the deal entirely and then filed a massive lawsuit against Kroger, the parent company of well-known Fred Meyer and QFC. The bitter breakup marks the end of a 2-year saga that stood to upend grocery shopping across Oregon and centered largely right here in Portland. Joining me today to unpack the final twists and turns of the supermarket deal gone sour is my colleague, Kristine de Leon, who has had a front row seat to so much of this drama and action. Kristine, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Shane. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. I mean, this has been kind of a wild tale from start to finish, but I was hoping just before we get into the very eventful last few days, you could just sort of remind listeners of what this proposed merger and deal was between Kroger and Albertsons to start, and why, sort of from the get-go, federal regulators had some real concerns about it.
Yeah, so in October 2022, so just over 2 years ago, Kroger and Albertsons announced that they wanted to merge because the retail landscape, grocery retail, is getting more and more competitive. Like, it's fiercely competitive, and retail grocery has pretty low profit margins, and now they have to compete with like dollar stores and Costco and Amazon and Walmart. And Walmart has been like every grocer's rival. And so by combining, their pitch was that by combining, they could lower prices for shoppers and also increase quality and stay in business longer. Mm-hmm. But federal regulators and also state regulators and consumer advocates and shoppers were pretty concerned because when you look at the grocery industry, it's already pretty consolidated. There's been just mergers throughout history, and when you have a very concentrated market, prices tend to increase and quality tends to decrease. And also, whenever there's consolidations, stores would shutter. And so Kroger and Albertsons designed this divestiture package. And initially they said that they would sell off like around 480 stores. And then they increased it to like nearly 600. And basically they would sell all of the stores wherever they have significant overlap. And so they have significant overlap in the West, like all throughout the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So Oregon and Washington were pretty impacted, and Colorado too, but also California. And so Colorado and Washington filed their lawsuits first, And the FTC filed a lawsuit, which Oregon and several other states joined. And yeah, they pretty much brought up the same concerns. And they were going to sell, like, so the buyer of these divested stores was going to be C&S Wholesale Grocers. And they're like a grocery supplier based in New Hampshire. They only operate like roughly 20, like 24 stores. And they have a pretty poor track record of running grocery stores. And so that was brought up during the trial. And Judge Nelson said that like CNS doesn't have the scale, like CNS wouldn't have the scale to compete with a combined Kroger and Albertsons. There was like a lot of evidence that they brought up during the trial. And yeah.
Right. So you're talking about a trial, and I was going to ask, just you earlier this year, you spent several weeks on an almost daily basis hanging out in a federal courthouse in downtown Portland. Tell us a little bit more about what you were doing there.
Yeah, I was listening to the arguments. It was pretty, like the first week was really interesting. I went to the courthouse early, but people already had started lining up at 6 a.m. And a lot of people from Wall Street were there to watch the deal because people are making bets on this merger. And they would hire people to stand in line so they could just roll in like at 8 a.m. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was a packed courtroom for the first week. It was an overflow. And yeah, we were just hearing all the arguments by the FTC. So the first week and a half, the FTC so first they had their opening arguments, like both sides, and then the FTC started their case. And after they wrapped up their case, Kroger and Albertsons started their own arguments. So both sides had experts, they brought in evidence, and yeah, I was just there listening to their arguments.
Right. But so, I mean, federal regulators had some real concerns about this merger. You said that Oregon wasn't happy with it. Washington wasn't happy with it. Colorado wasn't happy with it. A bunch of states and states attorney general had filed lawsuits. How did we here in Portland, end up being sort of ground zero for having this hearing a trial? How did this case end up landing, in Judge Nelson's chambers?
Well, so from talking to some experts, they mentioned that the judges are kind of picked at random, but their theory as to why the FTC would file in Portland is that, well, Oregon is one of the states where it's highly, like this deal would really impact consumers here. And they haven't filed their own separate lawsuit like in Washington or Colorado. And like experts also mentioned that, well, they could probably have a better case arguing it in Oregon where there's more people concerned about this merger, whereas like filing it in Florida or something.
Yeah. So that 3-week trial or hearing wrapped up a few months ago. And then just this last week, or actually it's this week when we're recording, but by the time this episode comes out, it will have been last week. Judge Nelson finally made a ruling. And I mean, tell us where she landed here.
Yeah. So she sided with the FTC's arguments that this merger is likely to hurt competition and would likely drive up grocery prices. And she said that she decided that that Kroger and Albertsons arguments about the benefits of the merger, that it would lower prices for shoppers and that it would increase competition because they would have CNS. as a buyer is not market specific. So basically, like they could have, or it's not so those arguments were not merger specific. Like they could drive down prices already if they wanted to without the merger, is basically what she said.
And I mean, as you kind of pointed out already, I mean, you had people lining up for to get into the courtroom for this 3-week hearing. I mean, the reporting that you and our other colleague, Matt Kish, did around this trial, I mean, this was news coverage that was picked up around the country. This was a pretty big case, a major antitrust case that the feds were taking up. Obviously, it was going to potentially have a profound impact on grocery shopping here in Oregon and in other states. So we have, the judge coming down with this pretty consequential ruling here in Portland. And, I thought reading that story right off the bat, like, okay, this is a pretty big deal. This is big news. And then I remember waking up the next morning and it was like 6:30 in the morning. And here you were back with another story with breaking another pretty significant twist in an already just very, crazy, windy saga. And tell us about what was the next shoe to drop after Judge Nelson's ruling last week?
Yeah. So less than 24 hours after Judge Nelson made her ruling and after Washington State also made their ruling, Albertsons turned around and pulled the brakes, or no, they pulled the plug and terminated the deal entirely. And not only that, they also filed a lawsuit against Kroger, accusing them of not doing enough to win regulators' approval. And they demanded billions of dollars in damages for lost shareholder value, legal fees, and also accused Kroger of acting in their own financial interests and ignoring regulators' concerns, and also just not doing enough to find a stronger divestiture buyer. So basically, so lawyers say that just confirms that Albertsons already knew that this deal was going to fail, and they're blaming Kroger for not doing enough. Kroger hit back and they said, no, Kroger, Albertsons is just deflecting its own responsibility. Albertsons is just as responsible for the deal's failure. And they said that Albertsons is not entitled to this $600 million merger breakup fee. And that was one of the things that Albertsons is also asking. And so one lawyer I talked to mentioned that Albertsons move to sue Kroger for that termination fee and also billions in dollars in damages is a sign of distress, like a company that's in distress, that
Right.
It's floundering. But another lawyer I talked to mentioned that, well, they're also pouring in billions of dollars in stock buybacks and they're increasing their dividends for their shareholders. So are they really financially in trouble? Let's see.
TBD. I mean, it's just wild for me to think that, on one day, here you are, two large grocery store conglomerates are looking to make a $25 billion deal. And the next day, they're breaking up in real spectacular fashion and suing and one is suing the other for billions of dollars. I don't know what to say about that relationship or what a therapist would say, but it doesn't look great.
Yeah. And then what's really significant about this whole case and regulators challenging it is that it's the first grocery merger that's been blocked that's been temporarily blocked in several decades. A lot of mergers usually go through. So when you look at the history of grocery mergers, usually they just get the okay or they have a settlement. So statistically, there was a pretty strong likelihood that, maybe the judge would just let this go. Like just looking at the track record, it seemed like they had a pretty good chance, but also like the Biden administration has been pretty aggressive with mergers.
Yeah, and antitrust regulation at large. So what happens now, Kristine, and what happens next? And also, I'm just curious, what your sense of Albertsons and Albertsons owns Safeway, and Kroger is Fred Meyer and QFC, which are, grocery stores that many Portlanders and people in Oregon shop at. And part of the entire argument or rationale behind this merger was that all of these supermarket chains were struggling against their other competitors, especially sort of online behemoths and big retailers like Walmart and Amazon and companies like that. So, yeah, how is Fred Meyer or QFC, Albertsons, Safeway? What are those futures looking like for those grocery stores that many of us, myself included, have been going to for 35, 40 years?
Yeah. Well, so in the original plan for their divestiture plan, all of the Albertsons and Safeways and QFCs in Portland were going to be sold off to CNS. But now that's not going to happen. Kroger stock has been doing pretty good. Like, it's increased value over time, while Albertsons stock has lost about a third of its value since the merger was announced. And
oh boy.
But it's not really, that's just a stock price. It's different from how it's doing, like running, how healthy it is. They do have money, like both companies. Kroger is larger than Albertsons. It's kind of unclear, like how that future looks like. Well, they are rewarding their investors, so they have money for that. But I'm not in a position to say like how that downstream will impact the stores and how we're going to see the prices, like whether they're going to actually decrease it. Well, that was like the other pitch that Kroger said, was that they were going to lower prices for the Albertson stores. Like, they were going to invest $1 billion in lowering grocery prices. Now that didn't go through. Will we just see grocery prices increase? I don't know.
And going forward here in the coming weeks and months, what are you going to be paying attention to, or what remaining questions are still on your mind with this story?
Well, I'm really interested in seeing what they're going to do with the stores. Like, now that the deal is off officially. And they had pitched like why this deal was really important. And they testified and warned people that if this deal doesn't go through, they can't keep prices down. They could potentially close. They could leave markets altogether, do some like serious cuts across their operations. And so, yeah, I'm interested in seeing like how Albertsons will move forward and what will happen to the Safeways and the Albertson stores in the Portland area.
Well, I know that a lot of our listeners are going to be paying attention to this as well as things continue to unfold. So, Kristine, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and stories like this one is with a subscription to the Oregonian OregonLive. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.